Hey everybody, this is Andrew from the Jazz June and Post Skeleton, and you're listening to The New Scene.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The New Scene. I am your host, Keith, and we are back with a brand new episode. And on tonight's show, Aaron Pendergast. Now, he's one of the directors of the upcoming documentary film, The Blasting Room, which documents the history of Bill Stevenson's studio of the same name. And Bill Stevenson is, of course, drummer of the Descendents. Now, in this interview, you'll hear about Aaron's history. You'll hear about his history in filmmaking. You'll hear about the Blasting Room documentary and the many great bands who have recorded there over the years. So that's coming up momentarily. Now, folks, you need to support the scene, the new scene, that is. Give us Apple Podcasts and Spotify reviews. Come on. We need them. We want them. We've got to have them. We're trying to get over 100. Open up your Apple Podcast app and give us 5 stars. Write a nice review if you feel like it, and I'll read it on the air. Also, give us Spotify reviews. I'm trying to get us over 100. We're getting closer, and you're getting us there. So thank you, everybody who has submitted a review. Also, you can support us financially by purchasing the Life is Music is Life New Scene long sleeve shirt. Head over to the store at Death Wish Inc. Search The New Scene. The shirt will pop right up. Purchasing this shirt will help us with our operating costs. You know, we don't have a Patreon. We don't charge for any extra content. I just put it up and it's yours, free of charge. Also, folks, support our sponsor, Iodine Recordings. There's a lot of exciting things going on at Iodine. We have a new signing over at Iodine Recordings. And the new signing is Her Head's on Fire, the newest Iodine Recordings band. Now, Her Head's on Fire features members of Saves the Day, Small Brown Bike, Garrison, and The Bomb. Welcome to the family, Her Head's on Fire. Now, I saw Her Head's on Fire live a couple months ago in Brooklyn, and I dug it. I really dug it. They've got a new LP up for pre-order. It's called College Rock and Clove Cigarettes. Head on over to iodinerecords.com and pre-order the record. I hope this one song is on it. I've had it stuck in my head since the band played. It was the song they opened with at the gig. I don't know the name of it, but I will be listening to the LP, that's for sure. Also, some more Iodine news. One Line Drawing has a new single up, This Is Water. Love it, need it, go check it out. You need to hear it. And there's more coming, folks. And I'm not just saying that. There's a lot of exciting things happening over at Iodine Recordings, and you're going to want to stick around for it. Trust me. Okay, so check back in with me in segment 3 to see how I'm doing. But right now, it's time for the interview. And folks, you'll hear Tommy on this one because we recorded it a few months back when he was still on the show. So let's do it right now. We're going to speak to Aaron Pendergast. Enjoy. All right, folks, we're here now with Aaron Pendergast. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. You know, you've got the upcoming Blasting Room documentary film that we're going to be talking about. But first, let me ask you, Aaron, how are you doing today?
I am good today. I feel like my life is in a constant state of triage right now, but I'm in a good lull. So it's a good day today.
Oh, that's great. So tell us about this constant state of triage. What's going on?
So I have I have a day job on top of doing the film stuff, and my wife and I are in the process of selling our current home and buying another one, and so all of that is just a whole lot to deal with. And then the movie, trying to wrap up production, it's just very busy all the time.
So you're working a day job, selling a house, buying a house, and making a film all at the same time?
That is correct.
I am impressed because I can barely even hold this podcast together, and I rent.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like weirdly my like state of normal is just a million fires all the time. I don't know like when that happened in my life that I decided that's how I wanted to live it, but it's been pretty consistent throughout my life that that's just what I do.
Yeah, I feel you on that. That's what I've got going on now too. So where do you live?
I am in Thornton, Colorado, so a suburb just north of Denver.
Did you grow up around there?
I grew up in Fort Collins, actually, near the studio. So,
Oh yeah, where is that?
so it's in Fort Collins, Colorado, kind of near CSU campus. If you're familiar with Fort Collins at all, we lived probably about 5 miles from there. And my parents are still in the same house I grew up in. So whenever it's kind of convenient, right? I can go up there, shoot at the studio, see the family. Like, it's a good spot.
So you grew up in Colorado. Tell us about your hometown. Tell us about growing up there. Set the stage for us a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny. Like, Fort Collins is very much a college town. It's a big. I say town. It's big, right? There's probably 150,000 people or something there. So it's one of the larger northern cities in Colorado. And again, with CSU being there and it being a big school, there's a lot of people in flux, has like a college town vibe. But having grown up there, it's kind of one of those places you just want to get away from and not come back to, right? So it's funny that there's so many people, especially the people at the studio, like really love the town, and there's a lot of reverence for it for the people that come in to make records and things, because it's kind of like a nice change of pace from like a big city vibe. But I kind of have the opposite view just from it being my hometown of just like, Fort Collins kind of sucks.
So you're growing up there. What was your thing growing up? Did you get into music? Did you want to play music? What was your thing?
Yeah, that for me, it was initially music, right? I just loved music, wanted to play, wanted to perform, but never had the balls to do it. So never really got into bands or anything other than like, the middle school, high school band playing saxophone or whatever. But I always loved music. Got turned on to punk rock when I was in, elementary school when Dookie came out, and that was kind of my introduction to it, and was pretty much hooked from there. Have always been a big fan of punk rock and music, and just like not the mainstream cool things. Like I was into video games and stuff too, so just very much the the nerdy kid. But it's always been something I've enjoyed.
You're speaking my language now. Dookie, video games, these are all very good things. Now, Dookie was kind of my entry point for, I never really got into a lot of punk rock stuff, but I was caught up in the alternative boom, and Green Day kind of became big around then, and Green Day were my favorite band for quite a few years. So Dookie was a very important album to me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like kind of in the same vein, right? Green Day was a very important band for me for a long time. And again, that being the intro, and then a lot of that just pop punk, mid to late 90s kind of stuff. And then, of course, that kind of natural evolution into, the like emo scene certainly has a lot of similarities to punk rock. So got into some of that too as I got older. And yeah, it's just kind of, I like a lot of different music, but it always kind of comes back to that core punk rock place.
Absolutely. And tell us about your trajectory a bit. Like me, I came in from alternative with a spice of new metal, and then straight into hardcore and metalcore and all of this crazy stuff, and then eventually to emo. Tell us about your trajectory and some of the bands that were important and influential to you.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. So let's see. So there was the Green Day intro. Like, funnily enough, Rancid was also big at the time, and I was never really into them because like the like punk kids that were into that were like the really hardcore, like, mohawks and studded jackets and all that. And I wasn't like quite that into the scene where I had to look the part too, So I picked up on them like kind of later in life. So I'd say for me, gosh, I'm trying to like go back now and think about where all this came from. So, I mean, there was like the Green Days and like the Sum 41, Blink 182, like that kind of stuff, Offspring, obviously. And then as time went on in the like, kind of the emo space, I landed on bands like Finch and, oh gosh, why am I drawing a blank now on like every band I like? Oh gosh. And of course, all my stuff's packed, right? So I can't even look at my music collection that's normally right next to me and say like, oh yeah, those bands, it's all gone right now. So like Finch, Alkaline Trio, that was definitely like a later pickup for me in high school. My neighbor introduced me to those guys and just immediately fell in love. From Here to Infirmary, again, one of those just quintessential albums for me. The Ataris was another big one. They're actually why I know about the Blasting Room, was Look Forward to Failure was recorded in Fort Collins. And that was just one of my favorite as an adolescent, like just spoke to me kind of records, And yeah, and then as time went on, like Gaslight Anthem, and then getting into like Brian Fallon's solo stuff and Dan Andriano's solo stuff. So like lately I find myself more in like a singer-songwriter kind of space, weirdly enough. Like it's kind of a strange evolution over time, but it's always like, to me, like lyrics are really important, and all the music I listen to is just very strong lyricists.
So did you get into the local scene? Were you going to shows around that time as well?
Oh yeah. It was great having like the Aggie in Fort Collins growing up was our kind of local, kind of small theater. But I mean, we had so many great bands that played in Fort Collins at the Aggie that you just, as a kid, you don't think like they would play there, right? So like Real Big Fish played the Aggie, and there was a band called The Format that Nate Roos then went on to do the band Fun, and they played in Fort Collins at the Aggie like right before they became huge. Finch, I saw Finch there for like $7, and then their Letters to You was on the radio like the next week. So I mean, it was just kind of like Fort Collins just was kind of this place where a lot of bands came through, and then suddenly everybody knew that band. It felt like right after that. And then also just not having to drive to Denver for shows was kind of nice, because we were teenagers and the parents didn't like us taking their cars to Denver. So
it sounds very similar to our scene. We had this microcosm of a scene in the Philadelphia suburbs, so we would get all the bands to come through, and we didn't have to drive to Philly and get in car accidents and get in trouble.
Exactly. And I think too, like in retrospect, I wonder how much of it was like, oh, the blasting room's here, let's check out Fort Collins while we're in Colorado, and I don't know if that was actually part of it, but I could see that being a factor potentially.
Let's talk about, now you've done directing and producing and working in film. How did you first get into it?
So I, in high school, I had a buddy who worked for the school TV channel thing that we had. And he got me into editing video content. And it was kind of one of those, I was like, oh, this is fun. And then I found out that you could actually do that as, a profession. So I decided, I want to edit movies. And because I liked kind of action movies and high energy stuff at the time, I was like, yeah, I want to edit action movies, which is a really very much a teenager thing to think, right? And then from there, it just kind of like, you realize how hard it is to get into the film business and everything else. And I kind of, I guess, like wandered around trying to figure out how to navigate this space, particularly, going to college and then graduating into the recession and not having a lot of jobs and everything. So then I went back to film school in 2009, and that was the same year one of my good friends and kid I grew up with was injured in Afghanistan in the Marine Corps. He was an EOD tech, and that his injury and me telling people about his story prompted my first documentary short. And then that was kind of after that, people liked it enough. I thought, oh, okay, I got a knack for this documentary thing. I'll work on that. And that had come from my previous time in college doing television production. We did mostly like TV news type stuff. So I was used to setting up and lighting interviews. So documentary just seemed kind of like I know how to do that. Let's do that for this movie. And then, yeah, just kind of, that's just been what I've done ever since.
How do you feel about that thing they do in documentaries where before the interview, they show them like getting mic'd up? What is that all about?
It's weird, right? It's like this new trend in all the doc content on Netflix and HBO and that, where they have that, like the person coming in and sitting down and like testing the mic or whatever, or like taking a sip of water. And it's like, I don't quite get that. I think it's just like they're trying to do something a little different, or trying to acknowledge that people know this is a setup and it's an interview, but it is kind of weird. Like, I don't know if it's my thing. I'm not doing it in this movie, I can tell you that.
All right, so folks, there will be no miking up in Blasting Room.
Yeah.
Just straight interviews.
No people settling, like it's just going to be, they'll already be seated and ready to go.
Yeah, I get it. I guess they want to show maybe some more humanity or something. Like even with this show, I'll slip in like outtakes or mess ups or sometimes just because I think it's funny.
Yeah, well, and there's aspects of that, right? Like when there's some directors I've worked with when I'm editing that they make things too sterile. They cut out every like pause and every and ah and like those moments where people are thinking about things. And to me, it does, right? It takes away some of that humanity and some of that the natural flow of things. Not to say I leave all of that in, right? Because you don't want people to sound stupid, but it's nice to leave some of it in there.
Yes, I used to take it all out but I've learned that you need it sometimes. So when I'm editing, I'll say, is this important, or is this not important? Because sometimes it's very important to leave an or to leave space leading up to an answer, because you want to hear the person thinking about it, because what they're saying is going to be important.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of like building in those pauses and letting them be natural, right? I don't know. For like, there's something, I have a weird hang up with doing documentary work. And again, it might come from the background I had in television and kind of a news space where there's an authenticity I want to preserve. And I don't want to put in like fake pauses or unnatural pauses, or, there's something to be said for like the art form and doing something to make the best movie you can make. But at the same time, I don't want to like, I don't know, manipulate it so much that it's not like real anymore.
Exactly. I would never want to manufacture a reaction or an answer to something. I work with what I have and make it the best that it can be.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was going to say, my wife and I watched a documentary over the weekend, The Donut King, about the guy who's a Cambodian guy who came to the United States and started like 60 or 70 donut shops. But like the first and second act of the movie are about him moving to the United States and him starting all these shops. And towards the end of the second act, there's this really, really punctuated pause. And it's with the camera focused on him. And you're like, wait, well, something bad happens? What the fuck? Like, because they ask him a question about, finances and doing all this stuff. And it's like a solid 5 to 6 seconds of him just kind of deeply exhaling and kind of like, readjusting his posture. And I was like, oh shit, something goes wrong here. Like, that was just a great part of the movie where I saw it. And I was like, whoever, when you're, sculpting things like this, do you really have to spend enormous amounts of time with the footage before you really start thinking about how is this going to be kind of pieced together in terms of a narrative? Or do you kind of like not script out, but like, the talking head part of this is going to come up, then the B-roll of this is going to come up. Like, how does that work?
So it's really tricky, especially with docs, right? Because you never know what people are going to say or what you're going to uncover in the process of an interview. And with Blasting Room, that's definitely the case, because there's not a lot of, at least there wasn't when we started the film, a lot of just information about the studio and its like history and what happened online, right? Like there might have been, like if I, tracked down interviews with Bill or Carl or those guys, like, and poured over those and dug through every audio interview they did, you might find that content, right? So for this, it's like you kind of go in with an outline and then follow that as best you can for the interviews. And then, yeah, it's just sitting down and like poring over the footage over and over and over again and trying to figure out, okay, what works? How does this integrate? Like, where is this going to be most effective? And yeah, it's just like, and that to me is kind of the fun part, right? Is like figuring out where's the story and how does it all fit together?
Yeah, that's interesting. Here's a question. When you're editing something that's not yours, like your early editing work, how does that work? Because when I'm editing my show, I know exactly what I want, what I don't want, how I want things to sound. It's inside of me. It's like an art form. I can feel it. I can do it. But when you're editing someone else's work, do you have extensive notes that you're working off of and specific things that you have to do? How does that work?
Well, it depends on the content, right? So like the couple narrative pieces I've done, you have a script and you usually have like a shot list, and that script is you have someone called a script supervisor that's basically like lining your script. So saying like, shot 6A is this part to this part of the script. So you've kind of got your bins and your shots, listed out as this is shot, 6A, take 1, take 2, take 3, right? So from there, you can just kind of build out the kind of the rough edit based on the script and the shot list and where those things line up. With documentary, right, it's there's a lot more interpretation there. So in those cases, I've worked off of kind of, like I said, what I do is, we have an outline. And so it's a matter of saying, okay, this is the part of the content that fits with this part of the outline. So usually what I'll do is kind of go through and see, okay, where do we actually have coverage? Like what aspects of the story in the outline that we were hoping to capture have we actually captured? And if there's anything that we just don't have content for, we don't have enough content for, you can kind of cross it out and then kind of figure out, okay, here's the structure we have, or the kind of how we can break that outline into, here's our 3-act structure from this outline, and then just kind of piecing things together. And then, so usually what I'll do is work on large sections of the story and then sit down with the director and say, okay, here's what I have. What do you have to add? Right. And then the director will come in and say, this is great, or we need to talk more about this because it's really important later in the story, right? Because they understand the story a little better than I do as the editor. But I do kind of like that because you have that objectivity from someone who doesn't know the story as well, piecing it together, because they may pick up on something that your director knows intrinsically about the subject that they might not realize the audience doesn't know because they're too close to the material, right? So I think having that separation is a benefit to the project. And then, just kind of, but it is important to sit down with the director frequently to go over edits and get feedback and work sections together to really make it flow the way it should.
Have you ever had to edit and there was a overbearing director sitting next to you the whole time saying do this, no, don't do that, put this back?
Definitely, yeah. There's one piece in particular I can think of where we had someone who did not. They were the director / producer. They worked in kind of a television space, and they were doing something that was far more effective as an emotional narrative type piece. And they just didn't get it. And they were button heads with me the whole way getting this thing done. And I honestly think it did not turn out as well as it could have because of that. They were out of their element and did not want to listen to someone younger with less experience from their perspective on it, when it was but this isn't, we're not doing what you used to do. This is something different.
So do you basically just have to do what they say, and even if it doesn't make sense for the project?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the setting, right? In that particular case, I was being paid to work on this project, so it was kind of they were paying me, so whatever they say goes. On a lot of the things I've worked on, it's been kind of a passion project that I'm working on and I'm not getting paid. And in those cases, I feel much more empowered to kind of push back and say, look, the only thing I'm getting out of this is that my name is on it. And if it turns out good, then that's good for me. And if it turns out bad, it's bad for me. So we need to this needs to not make me look like I don't know what I'm doing.
That makes sense. So you did some editing and you did this documentary film leading up to Blasting Room. Tell us about some of the road leading to Blasting Room. What other projects did you do before you got the idea for Blasting Room?
So I started off with a movie called Coming Home, which was the title ended up not working, but we were too far in to change it. My buddy Jesse Cottle was injured in Afghanistan. He was an EOD tech. And I made that doc, and it was received very well. And a fellow student filmmaker that I knew, but guy who's more talented than anyone should be allowed to be, called me up personally to say he really liked it and wanted to work on something with me. So that made me say, okay, I did something right with this. I should stick to the doc thing. But a lot of people were, because it was, military focused thing, I had people coming out of the woodwork being like, oh, here's this other great military story and this thing and this thing. And I was like, I don't want to be the military doc guy, right? Especially being a kind of a punk rock kid. I'm not pro-military. I was pro my friend, but certainly not pro-military. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. That's not going to be the next thing I do. So I worked on another short film that my wife turned me on to about a dog that was the world's first animal to receive 4 prosthetic limbs. And because Jesse had prosthetics, it was kind of a natural progression to something else that was prosthetic driven, but in an animal focused story. And that's kind of been everything I've done has been a lot different from something else I've done, right? There's not been consistency to the types of stories I've told, mostly because I don't want to get pigeonholed into a certain type of narrative, right? So with that, I did a few short films, got connected with a guy I worked in reality television with for our first feature, which was called The Buffalo King. And he'd never done a documentary before. I take that back. He shot one, but he only shot it. It didn't, he gave it to an editor and that guy never did anything with it. So it just kind of, died on the vine essentially. So he got this opportunity to do this feature, or it wasn't supposed to be a doc, but he convinced them to turn it into a documentary thing and wanted to bring on somebody who'd done a documentary before. So that was kind of why we connected to work on that piece. So those first 2 features were really, this other filmmaker, Justin Kaler, he was the director producer. They were both South Dakota stories, kind of historical biopic type movies, and a lot of fun to work on. But after doing those, I was like, I think I've done this enough that I can kind of do my own feature. So I wanted to kind of branch off and do something, try to do a feature without Justin. No offense to him at all, but it was just, like, I've done this. I want to see if I can do it on my own, because the short documentary work I'd mostly directed and had been moderately successful. So with that, I took took a page out of Justin's book and said, okay, he's a ranch kid. He's doing these Western stories based in South Dakota. He grew up in South Dakota. Like, I need to find that niche for me. Right. And so the punk rock thing and then the blasting room being in Fort Collins was just kind of like that perfect evolution of not only just my trajectory as a filmmaker, but also just kind of finding that perfect, equilibrium of a scene I was in and a place that I'm from to be the first kind of feature film that I direct.
I have a question about, you did Floating Horses, right?
Yes.
So a lot of that stuff is older footage intercut with the talking headshots, right?
Right.
When you found that footage, how did you go about like organizing it? Like, because there's so much information, like how do you kind of whittle it down to, this is what we're going to use in this section?
That is a really good question. It's, it's a lot of hard work. What a lot of people don't realize too is 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter film are as good or better resolution than 4K footage. So incorporating it, if you get it transferred correctly, isn't like, it actually incorporates very well. But yeah, deciding what to use is very difficult. And usually what we'll do is, as the footage is coming in, we kind of like mark things as this is the best stuff. And then this is the like, this stuff's good, right? And then this is it's not great, but if it's all we get, we'll use it for that, right? And then for me, it's about finding like what visually speaks to what's happening in the narrative the best, right? So even if it's not the best footage, like what are they talking about? And does this visually represent that idea in a way that it fits the context of the scene?
So if they're talking about an injury, you find footage of him falling off the horse, like during a rodeo, that kind of thing. Like, you're like, all right, this may not be the best footage. However, it lends itself to what's being spoken about.
Right. And two, you want to go for like something more artistic, right? So if it's like, not that, sometimes like literal is good too, but if it's like him talking about struggling with, his addictions with alcohol or gambling, like him falling off a horse when talking about those things, right? Because it can be that idea of, you're not performing at your best, right? Or you're struggling with something, and how does that manifest in other areas of your life?
Do you ever not have footage and you have to film some of that stock footage, like, like a bottle pouring into a glass or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. And we did some reenactments with Floating Horses, and it's kind of, you don't want to do that, but at the same time, if that's the best you can do in a situation, sometimes that's what you got to use. Or yeah, like the stock footage. I try not to do that if we can pick it up, right? Because sometimes you can get like if we need, the audio meters jumping or something on a mixer, we can go to the studio and get that. Or I've got a mixer here at home that I'm using to record right now that I can get those kind of levels jumping on, right? And then that way you're using stuff you shot, so you control like the resolution and the framing and the lighting and keep that consistency. But sometimes, yeah, there's just not any getting around it. And especially with like, if you want to, if you're talking about like, oh, the punk scene in the 90s, like if we don't have footage of that, we need to just find stock footage that'll work.
Exactly. I like to use, I've shot little things here and there, music videos and stuff, and I like to use my footage, because if I don't have footage, I will borrow footage that I find online and hope I don't get sued. I have done that in the past. Allegedly. Let me say that so no one comes for me.
Right. Well, the nice thing with footage too, right, is there's for like fair use laws for copywritten material. So you can use it, and as long as you change the context of the original meaning of the content, you can get away without licensing it or paying anybody for it. You can't do that with music, but you can do that with a lot of like visual media. The tricky part is you do probably have to like pay a lawyer to write a fair use letter. So if somebody, hits you up for a copyright infringement, you can respond with that fair use letter. And then usually they drop it because it's not worth fighting it at that point. But it's not free to get a fair use letter drafted by a lawyer. So
now, you mentioned the inspiration for Blasting Room. You're looking for your local story, and I love that, because that's kind of how this podcast started. We loved our local scene. We loved the bands that were involved with it, and we wanted to tell our story. So tell us about your story, Aaron. How did Blasting Room come together? How did you get the idea? How did you get it started?
So I've it's kind of a funny. So I started a different feature film, and it failed spectacularly, which happens. Like I certainly when you're working on I was doing something that was a little more of, I don't know how to, like, it was a story where you couldn't get the exclusive, right? Like if you're making a documentary about, like, I don't know, a stock market crash or something, right? Like anybody could make that movie. And this kind of plays into how the Blasting Room started. So since that had kind of failed, right, I said, okay, I'm going to take one more stab at this feature thing, and then I'm going to just forget features and stick to short films. Because the thing with a feature is it's expensive, it's time consuming, you need a lot more content. A lot more can go wrong, right? So that had kind of failed, and I was trying to figure out, okay, the next thing I do, what I want to do, I'd mentioned earlier with the projects I'd worked on with Justin, is find that kind of local scene thing, something that I'm a member of that community, as well as something local that I could tell. And then also kind of taking a page from my own book of this recent failure of look at something you can get kind of more exclusivity on, more control over, right? So there's not a chance of somebody coming in with a 6-figure budget and telling the same story you were trying to tell with just the right amount of resources to do it faster. Because we were stumbling along with no money, trying to figure out how to move this thing forward. And it pretty much, like I said, kind of with Justin's first short doc, how it just kind of died because we had nowhere to go with it. So in this kind of like space of trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? How do I make all these things, this confluence happen to pull together a project? My wife was on a work trip, and so I was home alone, just kind of like in my own thoughts, ordered a pizza, sat down. Dave Grohl's Sound City was on Netflix or something. So I was like, oh, watch that. I've been wanting to see that. And it kind of like after, I think it was like, 2/3 of the way through the movie, and this is on the Kickstarter too, but like he just invites, Paul McCartney and Tom Petty and all these people over to make a record. And I was like, you completely lost me as a like average viewer when you brought in all these like super famous people to make a record on this, mixer that you probably spent way too much money on from this guy and put in your home studio. Cause of course you have enough money to do that shit. So it kind of, I was like, I want to tell, like, there's gotta be like a punk rock DIY version of this that would keep an audience connected. So I mentioned that my wife was out of town because after watching the movie, I had the benefit of having no one in the house, so I could pace around and talk to myself and not feel like an insane person for a little bit. And it was like just that light, because I know I've known the Blasting Room's been in Fort Collins since like 2001 or whatever. But it was like just that light switch clicked in the back of my brain that reminded me the Blasting Room's in Fort Collins, and you're only an hour north of Fort Collins now in Denver. That's your DIY punk rock Sound City. That's the scene that you're from and the town that you're from. Like, it's kind of all those things you've been hoping to find. So then it was just a matter of doing research to make sure nobody done it already. And then of course that turned me on to Filmage, and I was like, oh, well, do they talk about it in Filmage? And thankfully it's like a side note, they mention it, but only for like 40 seconds or something, and then they move on. So the story hadn't been told yet, and it just seemed like the right fit for everything I was looking for to get that kind of first feature going.
Oh, so you have the idea now. Tell us about how you get it started.
So I did a little bit of research, but going back to that partnering with who we're shooting with to get that exclusivity, right? I didn't want to do too much before talking to the studio, because I was hoping to kind of partner with Bill and Jason and those guys and really do something that did the story justice, and also kind of, like working with them to kind of get that exclusivity, right? Make sure that if they were working with me, they were working with me. So I did some research, so I didn't go in completely, blind to this thing, and emailed those guys. And this probably would have been, like, I want to say August of 2018, probably. I only remember because I got like a response from their email when we were at like a wedding in Estes Park. And that's like the reason I remember the weekend. And it was kind of like, it wasn't a no, but it was kind of a like, we'll think about it, but I don't know if we're interested in doing this, So I'd gotten that, like, and it took me a couple emails just to even get a response. Right. And then they said they'd get back to me, and I hadn't heard anything. So like it was getting close to Christmas, and I sent them another email and said, hey, holidays are coming up. I'm not going to bug you again. Just think about it. Let me know in the new year what you think. And, if you don't want to do it, no hard feelings. And then my buddy Travis and I were friends with the guys in Red City Radio, and we'd done some video work for them. And they had asked us to shoot this winter ball and brunch thing they were doing. And so at that, the brunch part, the acoustic show at Ratio Brewing the next morning, John Snodgrass and Ray Carlisle were playing, like opening for them. And both of those guys were on my list of people to interview for the Blasting Room, because they're both, big Blasting Room alumni. And introduced myself to Ray and John, and kind of told them what, this is what I'm trying to do. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but if it does and you hear from me, at least you know like who I am. And John was just super excited because he was supposed to be in Filmage and didn't get a chance to. So he was like, oh man, I'm not going to miss this one. And I know those guys, and let me see what I can do. So he put me in touch with Kevin Kirchner, who's been kind of their videographer at the studio for years. I didn't even know he had been, but like any of the stuff you see with Rise Against in the studio is probably shot by Kevin, and he's shot with most of the bands that have come to the studio over the years. So that was basically, John put me in touch with Kevin. Kevin's, friends with all those guys at the studio. He gets lunch and drinks and stuff with Bill all the time. Like they actually have, a relationship beyond just a professional one. So me getting in touch with Kevin was really that like kind of access point that we needed to make the project happen.
That's excellent. And that's excellent that you had the foresight to say to the folks at this acoustic event, hey, I may be doing this thing. Let's talk.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not, it's weird, right? Because like you never know with bands, like how often do they get asked to do like interview type stuff, press type stuff? Do they wonder, is this legitimate or not? And that was the other reason we wanted to partner with the studio, was we kind of had them, if we were working with them directly, right? If they had a question, they could contact the studio to verify like this was a real thing, right? And so that's also why I prefaced it with, I don't know if it's going anywhere, but in case it does, this is who I am if I reach out. So yeah, I think I'm very glad I did, because I had a second of like, should I bug them about this? Or I don't know, like and yeah, I'm very glad that it came together the way it did, because who knows, this may have been happening and I may not have been involved had I not talked to those guys.
So you meet Kevin. Kevin knows everybody. How do we get to the point where we're actually filming this thing?
It was a lot of him just kind of like whispering in Bill's ear, as well as kind of talking to the guys at the studio, who all kind of agreed that they should do something, but Bill doesn't really like to like celebrate himself. Like even the Blasting Room 25th anniversary show, which was kind of the thing that we used as the jumping off point for the movie, of saying like, look, there's this 25th anniversary this year, the show's coming up, this is the time to do this movie. Even getting him to do the show, talking to the guys at the studio, they were like, it was like pulling teeth. He did not want to do it. Because he's just not somebody who celebrates himself. And I totally get that, because I'm the same way, right? I don't tell people about my birthday. I don't try to make a thing out of, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm just not that kind of person. So it was a lot of just, again, like Kevin dropping hints, and the guys at the studio saying like, hey, we should really do this. This, it makes sense. We should really try to capture this in the moment. And then also too, just kind of an interesting take, because a lot of the times these studio documentaries are after the studio's gone, right? It's closed and it's whatever changed, we went from tape to digital and this studio couldn't survive, whatever the context is. So doing one about a studio that's still like active and making records and, a successful business, it's kind of a different take on the whole, recording studio documentary genre. So yeah, I think it was just that kind of everybody kind of nudging Bill in the right direction, and then, proving that we were going to handle it well, right? Because that's the other thing. You don't know how, they don't know me from anybody else. So how are they going to know I'm going to come in and treat it with respect and not just go in like looking to, set the place on fire and make them look bad? So I think that it also helped, like, me and Kevin connecting and having somebody attached that they were comfortable with. But I'll say from that first email I sent to us actually like getting the okay and shooting the first bit of footage was probably a full year.
Oh, wow. So a lot of legwork to get to actually filming.
Yeah, definitely. Did
you have to meet Bill at some point to get the okay?
So I did. And that it was kind of funny because I thought we already had the okay. So we'd met Jason and Jonathan and I think Chris. I don't think Andrew was there that day. Maybe it was Andrew, not Chris. I don't know. Anyway, we met like 3 of the people at the studio and kind of talked to him about the idea and everything. And then Kevin called me up one day and was like, hey, good news. Bill's on board. we're going to Odell Brewing to make the 25th anniversary beer for the show. All the staff's going to be there. Like, we should go and get some B-roll of all that. So we went to do that, and we show up and they're like, oh, here's like, put your name on this and, stick it on your shirt. And it was like this Odell sticker. And they're like, yeah, since you're guest brewers, like, you just like make sure that they can see the sticker and you drink for free. So, we were shooting and drinking and doing our thing all morning. And then, the Bill and everybody else shows up and they do their thing. And then we sit down for lunch, and Kevin or somebody was like, okay, so like, give Bill the rub, like pitch him the movie. And I was like, I have been drinking since 10 a.m. I can't pitch this movie to Bill right now. So it was kind of, I think it was like they were like, he was willing to hear me out at that point, but I was under the impression he was already on board with it. So I kind of had to just like completely unprepared pitch this idea to him at that point. And thankfully he was on board with it, but it just really, yeah, it was very much off guard, but I think I handled it well, improving in the moment. I mean, obviously, since we're making the movie now, but
way to come through after having been drunk all day.
Yeah, no, I just, again, it was like, I thought we were already good. So I was just, enjoying the shoot and having fun and hanging out. And then sure enough.
Okay. So folks, if you don't know, The Blasting Room, it's a documentary film about the legendary recording studio, which was started by members of the Descendents, and all in the 90s. They used an advance they got from their record label to secure a location for a studio and practice space. And there's interviews with a lot of great bands in this movie. We've got Descendents, we've got Rise Against, we've got Alkaline Trio, we've got Hot Water Music, and Iodine Recordings' own Audio Karate. Tons of bands, even beyond what I just mentioned there. How does it all work? Do you have to schedule all the interviews? Are you speaking to people? Are you setting the locations? Set the stage for us a bit.
So it's a little bit of, it's kind of a joint effort. So the nice thing with Kevin being involved is, since he's been around the studio and working with a lot of these bands for years, like, he's friends with all the guys in Rise Against and that. So if Kevin has a connection with the band, he works on scheduling everything, working with them, setting stuff up. For the other bands, we worked with Bill to kind of make the connection between myself and the members of the bands. That's kind of the other reason, right? To partner with the studio instead of going through like tour managers or, PR people or whatever for these bands. We can talk to the artists directly and schedule with them, which is a lot more convenient, because a lot of these bands are like, hell yeah, we want to do that. But, their manager or their tour manager or somebody is going to be like a blockade from that happening, which is their job, right? Like, they're supposed to kind of weed out the bullshit, and get them like the real gigs. But it's nice having that Bill connection. So again, yeah, depending on what artist it is, I'll work on it or Kevin will work on it. And then we try to, like, make our dollar go further. So like, before we did our Kickstarter at the end of 2021, in early 2021, we flew out to California because we were able to kind of coordinate it so we could get, I think it was like 7 or 8 interviews done in one weekend, because everybody was kind of in that area. So it's just a lot of like, kind of working around what you can, and then also trying to accommodate schedules as best you can. I know this from previous experience, that trying to interview a band when they're on tour is a horrible idea, and I still do it all the time, and I don't know why. But
tell us about a bad experience you had doing that. Now, you don't have to use a band name or anything like that, but did you interview someone and they just weren't ready, or it wasn't working?
I mean, it's a million different things that can go wrong. So like, one time the band's flight was delayed, or the bags took forever to show up or something. So we were supposed to have an hour before the show, and they showed up 15 minutes before, or an hour before sound check, and they showed up 15 minutes before sound check. So we just had no time to actually do the interview, which again, like, nobody's fault, right? That stuff happens.
Right.
Or, it's so it's like timing on that, or, oh yeah, you can interview them at the venue, and you get there and they have music playing like super loud, and you ask them to turn it off and they turn it off. And then like the bartender for the night comes in and is like, why isn't the music on? And turns it on like halfway through a response to a question. And so it's just like, it's so hard to coordinate, and there's so many moving parts, and there's so many things that like the band's trying to do that day to play, that making it work is just very difficult to do.
Yeah, I feel that. I had this great idea. I went to Furnace Fest and I was like, oh, I'm going to get all these little snippets with bands, and there was nowhere quiet. literally everywhere you were standing, there was loud music playing, even if you were standing far away from the stages. There was no backstage area that I imagined where it would be quiet. There was just nowhere good to actually pull this off.
Yeah, and that's always, I mean, with film stuff, like as much as the picture matters, audio is almost more important than what you see visually. You can have, I mean, they've done like test groups with audiences where they'll do like a great sound mix and people will come out and say the movie was great. And then they do like a not good sound mix and the audience will say like everything about it is bad, right? It's not just the audio. It's like, oh, the camera work was shitty and the acting was poor. And it was just the audio that was different. But like, that's how important it is, right? So yeah, if you can't control the sound in a space, it's almost not worth shooting the content.
So where do we stand with the documentary as of today?
As of today, we are, oh gosh. So we're into post-production. We have most of the production done. We are trying to do one day in March. We're getting everybody that's left to interview, just kind of planning like a weekend and just getting it all done that weekend so we can wrap the shooting and move into post-production pretty much entirely. There's a few things we're going to pick up at the studio. If like a band is, recording that we didn't realize was going to be recording, we'll probably go pick up more B-roll. There's a few interviews we're holding off on until we're farther along in the edit to make sure if there's any gaps, we can kind of fill those in. So that's with a couple of the studio staff members. We're going to kind of hit them closer to the end and then do like a follow-up interview with Bill, since we interviewed him in 2020, I think. It's been a couple years and there's been some changes at the studio since we interviewed him the first time. So kind of getting that like updated, what's happening now perspective will be good. But we are shooting for having the movie completed by September or October of this year.
Excellent. And how is it scheduling with bands? I assume you want to do all of these interviews in person so that you have a controlled environment and so that everything looks and sounds good. Do you have people flying to the studio? Do you have to go meet them or both?
It's a mix of both. So if bands are in town, like when we got Rise Against, they were here recording Nowhere Generation. So we were able to just get them while they were in town. We've traveled out to people. We haven't flown anyone here, mostly because I feel like it's a lot to ask someone, right? To like pack a bag, get on a plane. Like even if we cover all the costs, right? They're flying out here to sit in front of a camera for an hour with us. Like that seems like a lot, So we try to go to people as much as we can. Also because, the space you interview someone in can really speak to or add to their character. Like Chris Sherry's interviews in his living room and you can see all his art behind him and he has like a Milo pillow on his throw pillow on his couch and stuff. So, I mean, it's just like, it's that kind of vibe. Like we couldn't plan that we couldn't set dress that ourselves. Right. So getting people in their space, I think adds a lot to, just visually and also kind of speaks to who they are when you see them in their kind of natural setting. But it also helps like cut down cost if they're already here, So like when Rise was here making the record, much easier to get them. Or like with a band like Audio Karate, those guys kind of live all over, right? They're not in the same place anymore. So if you can kind of get them in one place at the same time, it's easier to get those interviews done. So it's a mix of things.
So how do you cover the cost and the time? I guess you got to find time in your personal schedule and do you have to fly or drive out to people if they can't make it in?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the good news with John and Kevin, my fellow filmmakers involved in this. They both kind of freelance full time for video production, so their schedules are a little bit like I would say easier to work with. Right, it can be tricky. Like if they have a paid gig, it kind of screws things up a little bit. But for the most part, if we plan ahead of time, they can show up. And then, basically it's me and Kevin have been paying for all the costs out of pocket until we had this crowdfunding campaign. Otherwise, we're just kind of planning, budgeting, and then paying for what we need to pay for to make it happen.
So you have a crowdfunding campaign via Kickstarter, yes?
Yes.
And I saw that the project has funded, but can people still contribute?
They cannot. So if you funded, you'd have access to our backer kit where you can add on additional perks and things. But now that it's closed, there's not really any way. We are looking at maybe backer kit does allow kind of like a shop site type thing where people could go in and order some of the stuff that was available in the Kickstarter. So shirts and pins and that sort of thing that we've considered setting up, but we haven't really gotten into it yet. It's a lot of work that I probably shouldn't be trying to do all by myself, but I'm mostly doing by myself.
If you want it done right, you got to do it yourself, right?
Right. Well, and I'm sure like Kevin would help, but it's one of those like, it's those weird, and I have another friend, Zach, that's a associate producer on this, that he's offered to do a lot of the work, but it's like by the time I type up and send him the info that I need, I could have just typed it into the thing I needed it in the first place. So it's hard to like pass things off when you're like, well, it's not saving me any time to actually do that. So
we're shooting for a September premiere for the movie. What are we envisioning here? Are we going to do an opening in a local theater? Are we going to have a red carpet and all the members of the bands come out?
So we are, it's kind of tricky with independent film. So the reason for that targeted completion date is the South by Southwest deadline. So we're trying to make their submission timeline. If we get into South by, we cannot screen the movie before South by Southwest. So now with that, what we can do is like cast and crew screenings. So the plan right now is, and some of the backers on the Kickstarter, if you backed at a certain tier, you were granted access to the cast and crew screening. So we are going to do like a big event thing around that with members of the band, people who worked on the movie, that sort of thing, but it won't be like open to the public as kind of like here's the movie, please don't hate it, right? And that kind of thing you're allowed to do because it's not a public exhibition type thing. But for a lot of festivals, especially the big festivals like South by, they kind of want like either a world premiere status or at the very least like a North America premiere status. So you can't have screened it anyway to the public prior to that festival. Once you've hit that, it doesn't matter anymore, and you can show it anywhere as much as you want. So we'll probably do like once we kind of land a good like big festival premiere, we'll do a bunch of local showings in Fort Collins and some smaller theaters and try to do like an independent theater run around the US, if not broader.
That's got to be exciting. I mean, this project is coming together. There's the potential to shop it at some fests. We're going to be doing premieres. It's got to be exciting, right? It's got to feel good after all these years and all this work you've put in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've really like, if you get into a good festival, they are a really fun experience as a filmmaker, right? Because it's kind of that like moment you get to celebrate all the work you've done. Because I don't make money making these movies at all. Like it's mostly a passion. I shouldn't say it. I've made some, but it's very like for the amount of hours put in, right? It's like $1.50 an hour or something. It's not good ROI. But it is a lot of fun to do. And the festival's that's like your moment to kind of relax and celebrate what you've done and, you know, talk to other filmmakers and hear some feedback. And they're just the experiences I've had with festivals have always been a great time. So I'm excited to get it done. And also, I mean, we started working, like I said, my first email about this was probably 2018. So it's 4 years later. I am ready to be done with it.
You know, I think it's great that you're doing this. These are the stories I want to hear. You mentioned that Dave Grohl Sound City movie and, you know, Dave Grohl, Paul McCartney, all those guys. That's cool, I guess. You know, I'll still listen to some music documentary stuff, even if I'm not crazy about the bands or it's something I don't listen to regularly. But the bands and the environment you're working in, Aaron, those are the stories I want to hear. You know, these are my bands. These are my stories. This is the stuff I'm interested in. And it's not incredibly documented. There's not a ton of stuff out there. So, you know, we had Dan Ozzie on recently who wrote Sellout. Those are a lot of stories that hadn't been documented previously, and I was excited to read about. And what you're doing now with the Blasting Room Studio and all the bands you've spoken to, this is my stuff. This is what I want to hear about.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? Like there's so much, I guess, like attention given to and, you know, I don't know, like credit put on like the big superstar bands and artists that, you know, have millions and millions of followers. And it's almost like these smaller bands, you know, as far as like the culture is concerned, don't matter. And to me, I feel like they're almost more important, right? Because I feel like the fans of these kinds of bands like care more about the music, right? So many of these other people, it's like they love the idea of these superstars, but they're not actually like there for the music or the message or the idea behind what they're doing. Like I don't think they're as passionate, right? And so, and I mean, that's like, I'm not saying all those fans, right? But there's probably a much higher like ratio of fans that really care about the band and the music and what they're trying to say for these smaller bands, right? Because they're really, I don't know, like I feel like like that's what keeps them around, right? I mean, you look at like a band like the Alkaline Trio, and they've never had like huge mainstream success, but they have such a like loyal fan base that every time I've gone to their shows, it's packed every single time. Doesn't matter where it is. So, you know, obviously they have people who really, really care about their music, but their stories, you know, aren't told as much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would love to see a documentary about the Alkaline Trio. They've been around forever. I don't know a ton about them.
Yeah. No, and they're, I mean, great band and super talented guys. And yeah, I think, you know, and again, they're like one of the bigger bands of all the bands we have in this movie, but they're also not like a huge band by any means, but they're still one of the bigger ones. So in this particular flick. So to me, it's just, yeah, I feel like a lot of times they're like dismissed or ignored. And I mean, I've told the story a few times, but you know, I had a coworker who was kind of giving me shit for going to a Less Than Jake show in 2017. And I was like, yeah, they're still making music and they're still a cool band. Like, why do I care if I went? Like,
yeah, we had this. I'm glad you say that. We had this exact conversation recently. And I don't like when this music is dismissed as, oh, I used to listen to that, or, oh, you still listen to that. It's like, look, I don't listen to every band I listened to when I was 17, but a lot of it is really important. So back up and shut up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if that's the thing that, you know, if you like that band or if they speak to you or if they're still like making music that you like, then who cares? You know, like that's your thing. That's what works for you. Then, you know, listen to that and, you know, fuck anybody who's not okay with that or thinks it's weird that you still like that band, you know? And that really, I think, was a big driver for me is I was kind of then at that point out to prove like, no, these bands do matter and they do make a difference in people's lives. And that was something when I interviewed John Christensen from Real Big Fish, and he had said like for him as a musician, some of the most like, you know, best experiences for him is when they're meeting fans and fans are telling them like, hey, your song changed my life, or like I was in a bad place mentally and your music like helped me get through that. And, you know, a lot of people are really dismissive when you say like, oh, that song changed my life. Like, I do think people throw that around more often than they should. But I mean, there's definitely, I think, a lot to be said for some of these bands are making music that do have a profound impact on people's lives, that do create positive change in someone who's struggling with something. And that's important, right? I mean, even if it's one person, that matters.
Absolutely. And that's got to be the best thing, you know, to hear that this piece of art that you created helped somebody through a tough time. We've had bands on and they've heard those stories. And I mean, it's just got to be the best thing in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, that's the thing that I think that's getting missed, right? Or that's not being realized by a lot of people, that this music is, you know, it's important and it's a positive impact on a lot of people's lives. And it's maybe not given the credit or attention it's due. So hopefully we can do that with this film.
Yeah, I mean, this is the music that speaks to me. Now, the Beatles, I've railed on the Beatles a lot on this show, and look, all due respect to the Beatles, I guess, but it's not for me. It's not the music I grew up with. It's not the music that spoke to me, and I'm tired of being treated like a second-class citizen because I don't acknowledge their quote-unquote greatness. Your thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, honestly, this is I'm glad you mentioned this, and I'll take it into the video game realm since we mentioned that earlier.
All right, you're really speaking my language now. Please
yes.
Continue.
So I have the same kind of like what you were saying with video games, particularly the Halo video games. I've never liked those, right? But I know that they are considered some of the best games. You know, at least the original was like redefined first person shooters or whatever. And I'm like, it's never been my thing. I don't like it. But I recognize that it has a place and a space within the realm of video games because it's important to a lot of people, even if I don't get it, right? And that's, I think it's important, right, to acknowledge that there are things that are given reverence that maybe are not for you, but that doesn't mean they're not relevant.
That is a excellent way to put it. You know, I have played several of the Halo games. I like them, but they were not life-affirming games for me.
Exactly. And I know a lot of people who are very much like too far into the punk rock mentality of like, oh, well, that's popular, so it sucks and it's not good. And it's like, no, it's fine if you don't like it, but don't just act like it sucks just because people like it. Come on. You know? Exactly.
So life-affirming game for you, Aaron. Let's hear it.
Oh, God. Recently, I'd say like the most of recent years, the most impressed I've been with a game was Ghost of Tsushima. on the PS4.
Yes. I still want to play that. I have not played it yet, but it looks excellent.
I had a friend who recommended it, and I was like, I've got a backlog. I don't know if I want to, add to it, whatever. And then I finally picked it up, and I was like, oh, holy shit, I'm glad I picked this up because it is an amazing game.
I'm going to get to it eventually.
Yeah. If you do play it in Japanese with English subtitles, like I really think that makes the experience better.
Good suggestion. I'm going to do that. Yeah, I do that with movies too. I want to hear the language of the people with English subtitles because then you don't lose the emotion and the nuance.
Exactly. Yeah. It's weird when it's just dubbed. And I have to admit, like, I don't normally do that. But for that game, I was like, I want to try to experience this as authentically as possible. And yeah, that's the way to do it.
So tell us how we can support you with the lead up to the Blasting Room documentary premiere.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, the Kickstarter's done, so we've got the money now for kind of the last few things we need to do, licensing music and all that. So it's really just going to be, me trying to keep my sanity and get this thing put together in a timely manner on top of everything else going on.
Okay. Is there social media or something we can follow?
Yes. So we're on Instagram, just Blasting Room Film on Instagram, and then we have a website as well, blastingroomfilm.com. The movie this gets a little mixed up. The movie is just titled The Blasting Room. But we had to specify film because the blastingroom.com is the studio's website. So it has to be a little bit different. So we have a website, we have an Instagram, you can follow us there. Updates are sparse, but I'm trying to get better. I say that every time I do a podcast and I still have not gotten better, but maybe this will be the one.
We're going to push you over the edge.
I hope so. It's just, I mean, it's tricky, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, as an independent filmmaker, right? Like it's me, Kevin, and John doing this. John is our cinematographer. So he's kind of really only involved when we're shooting. So it's just Kevin and I. Kevin's a freelancer, so he's got to take gigs where he can get them. And then I'm just kind of like every free moment I can find in my life, I'm working on this. So it's, we're all spread pretty thin trying to get this thing done, but we're all very, invested and passionate in the project. So it's just, trying to get there is always a challenge.
Well, Aaron, we're looking forward to the movie and we wish you all the best of luck with it. And we want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun.
There you have it, folks. Aaron Pendergast. That was an excellent conversation. It was great to hear Aaron's story. It's great to hear about the progress of the Blasting Room. I'm looking really forward to that coming out. And it's always nice to talk to somebody outside of music, hearing about the filmmaking process, hearing about everything that led up to Aaron making this documentary, the steps he had to take, all of it. It's all very interesting to me. So thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on the show. Now, let's check in. How are we doing, huh? How are you doing? How am I doing? Who knows? This weekend was kind of an L. This wasn't the best weekend in the world. I was stuck inside all day yesterday. Didn't get to go out, didn't get to do anything. But then I'm on Instagram and I see that there's this incredible show in Tompkins Square Park in Manhattan. Now, I'm usually in Tompkins Square Park on Saturday afternoons in Manhattan, but I was stuck at home. Who played? Murphy's Law, Burn, Wisdom in Chains, and some other bands. I don't have the full lineup in front of me, I'm sorry. But it looks like a great time. I guess this is an annual thing because on that date last year was the Madball show in Tompkins Square Park. So one thing I did get to do, though, was play like 10 hours of Warzone. I'm addicted to Rebirth solos. I played something like 80 games between Thursday night and Saturday night. I came in second place 10 times. Now, if you play Warzone, you know how painful second place can be, but I did come in first place, I think 2 or 3 times. So there you go. I got it done. I was determined to keep playing until I came in first place at least once. And I did more than once. So there you go. And that's about all that's going on. It's just work and podcast and work all the time. Everything is great here. I hope you're all doing well. feel free to write to me, newscenepod@iodinerecords.com. Keep those reviews coming. Keep those shirt orders coming. Thank you all so much for your support. Everybody who writes to me, everybody who sends in a review, everybody who's ordered a shirt, everybody who reposts us, it all goes a long way. I really appreciate you. And we're back next week. New episode, new guest. We are here every week. That I can guarantee you. So I look forward to speaking with you again. So thanks everybody for listening. And until next time.